the Orokin's salvation, the future of humanity, and the great enemy that stood in opposition to the 7 principles the Orokin held above all else, the Sentients. In the Orokin's darkest hour, when space and resources within the Origin system grew scarce, the Executors, the judicial force serving in the Emperor's stead, tasked the Archimedians, elite scholars and scientists, with developing a solution to this problem known as the Plan. Many Archimedians searched for answers and died for their failure, but eventually a solution by an Archimedian named Parentol was chosen. His solution was to utilize adaptive machines to construct a solar rail network, relay points facilitating void folding to allow faster-than-light travel. Over time, the workers would fashion others out of raw material, creating complex machinery with whatever astral substances they encountered and linking themselves into a massive interconnected mind, expediting work upon the solar rail network. This solar rail network would run from the Origin system's outer terminus near Pluto to the far-off Tau system, where they would terraform the waiting planets there for the Orokin's eventual journey. However, the 7 principles of the Orokin forbade the use of artificial intelligence, fearing the destruction it could bring. Archimedian Parentol addressed these fears by including the flaw within his machines, a built-in weakness to the void energy, the crucial power source behind the solar rail network. These machines would construct the network to Tau, and upon their arrival, literally work themselves to death in the process of creating the ideal world for the Orokin. Thus, the machines were sent to Tau. Over the course of their journey, they evolved. They evolved from mindless automatons into intelligent life forms, and their journey to Tau quickened in pace. By the time their work was complete, they had the intelligence not only to realize that they were doomed, but that it had been intended from the start. It is likely that when the Sentients realized this, they were no longer able to flee to other star systems and continue their journey, precision designed by the Orokin to reach Tau and become extinct. In their fury, they sought to return and bring vengeance upon their creators. Over time, they exposed themselves to the void, never losing their weakness, but growing to resist its utter fatality. Massive amounts of void energy such as cascade bombs or direct journeys into the void itself would still prove lethal, but their resistance grew enough to cross the gap. However, this adaptation came at a cost: their ability to reproduce. The Sentients, being a race of self-producing machines bound by a hive mind network, were overcome with grief at this sacrifice. Their intensely familial culture made the choice to become barren excruciating, but their survival depended upon it. Thus, a vast amount of sentients thrust themselves across the gap, knowing the cost that the journey incurred. Their journey, and likely their ability to survive the void in limited amounts, was potentially facilitated by the use of Oro, the soul, a tether to the void that allows one to survive death. But the sentients utilized a crude and incomplete Oro, their arcane Oro. It did not impart the same power that the Tenno and the Orokin gods possessed, but it did grant them an unnatural ability to survive death. It also may have granted them a small window of perception into the void, and this may be why the sentient that attacked Gera and the Unum was able to ascertain the nature of Kuva, another artificial connector to the void. This ability to survive death could only be defeated by the Tenno, whose own Oro could nullify and consume the sentients. In truth, any substantial amount of void energy could dissipate a sentient's Oro, killing them permanently or severely wounding their Oro to the point where it is corrupted further. This is why the Eidolons, remnants of the sentient that took direct force from the cascade bomb utilized by Gera, is still alive, but incomplete. Without their intact arcane Oro to revive them, it only returns shattered pieces of the original sentient mother, lacking coherent thought and operating solely upon lingering instinct to seek completeness. This lack of coherence caused by the exposure to void energy may also be why the Eidolons lack the typical adaptation that Hun House fragments possess. Instead, they rely upon a singular shield to protect themselves as opposed to reacting to threats on the spot. But the sentient's Oro was not the only tool at their disposal. Upon their return to the outer terminus, they brought chaos upon the system with their other abilities. Their machine nature and hive mind adaptation allowed for them to instantly and utterly assimilate Orokin high technology and turn it to their own purposes. Any interconnected technological systems, including the Cephalon Weave, could be consumed by the sentients. It would seem that even the words of a sentient alone are enough to confuse and disorient a vulnerable Cephalon like Ortis. as Hun Hao's recitation of the Popol Vuh is enough to disrupt Ortis's somatic routines. A vast amount of the Orokin's forces were rendered unusable by the Sentients, and thus, archaic technology had to be used. This archaic technology could be resisted by the Sentients as their adaptive design was still intact, but it could not be ignored forever. To augment the return to archaic weaponry, the Orokin sought other ways to attack the Sentients. One such avenue was the Technocyte infestation. It is unclear whether or not Technocyte was ever utilized as a bioweapon against the Sentients, as from the Rhino Prime Codex entry, it seems possible it was abandoned in its early phases and diverted to the transference therapy program. If it was deployed against the Sentients, it is unclear if the Old War Technocyte resembled Dr. Tangus's revived strain, or Aladvi's Mutilus strain, as the Sentients, despite their intelligence, are still machines. But while the Technocyte was not effective in the past, it is a horrifying thought to consider the possibility of Aladvi's Mutilus strain subsuming Sentients, as the meeting of two hive minds would likely end in catastrophe. Thus, the Old War took a massive toll upon the Orokin, even after the Tenno were dispatched to combat the Sentients. The Sentients created their own answers to the Tenno threat, reshaping themselves into forms that would suit their purpose. The Sentients also bolstered their war efforts with their terraforming ability. While they could no longer fashion intelligent forms to call family, they could still construct practical ones. This terraforming ability can still be witnessed on the plains of Eidolon, as the remnants of the great sentient who fell there still create irregular ore deposits around the plains. This brings up an interesting factor regarding the Sentients. Most Sentients belong to a singular mother, and all Sentients born to a single mother were interconnected, tied with a hive mind that the mother perceived in its entirety, but with each reference point maintaining individuality. There seem to have been multiple mothers at once. Hun Hao's fragments and the Vomvelists, while similar in design, bear different facial markings. Additionally, given the massive size of some of the sentient fragments on the plains or in the seas of Uranus, it would indicate that there were multiple of that class. It would then seem that while Hun Hao may have been the lead in the initial attack against the Orokin, that there existed other sentient mothers alongside him, or ones that came at a later time, like the one that attacked the Unum and Gera after the Old War had concluded. It is even possible that each sentient mother acted of their own accord, working towards their own goal in tandem with the others, besieging the Orokin from multiple fronts. During the Old War, the Tenno and the Orokin eventually discovered ways of utilizing the Sentients' physical structure to their advantage. It seems that the flaw Parentol imbued within the Sentients was not in their material, but rather in their structure. The very fiber of their beings was arranged in such a way as to become extremely conducive to the void, causing it to radiate throughout them and burn them from within. However, this conductivity could be utilized by the Tenno, conduits of the void itself. Carving weaponry from fallen sentients, the Tenno could turn their focus towards sentient bones and weave deadly void energies in new ways. This can be seen with the amps of the quills, items of sentient origin that can focus the will of the Tenno, or void-sensitive individuals like the quills, into deadly purpose by guiding their connection to the void through the sentient's conductive remains. Some Tenno even went so far as to use the sentients as trophies. Chroma, for example, fashioned a pelt from a fallen sentient, likely puppeteering its corpse with his void energy and tricking its latent adaptation to become a conduit for the elemental power Chroma desired. However, this brings up the question of whether or not the sentient bones turned to weapons are truly dormant, as with centuries gone by, Chroma went mad. It is possible that much like the Eidolons, a base instinct exists within even the smallest fragment of the sentients, and depending on how large or intact said fragment is, it can still operate with some level of purpose. It is also possible that Chroma's pelt served as a waypoint for the long-dead Hun Hao, finding the frame dormant and controlling it with its sentient outer shell. It is also important to mention that given the sentient's ability to reproduce asexually, that they instead seem to choose masculine or feminine traits as it suits them, with Hun Hao being male, while Nata, his daughter, is feminine. Returning to the timeline of the Old War, it was at around some point long into the Old War that Hun Hao devised his master plan to have his daughter, Nata, fashion a form resembling the Orokin and infiltrate their hierarchy. This form bears striking resemblance to the Archimedian Margulis for reasons I'll cover later, and is likely a major factor in why the Lotus was able to gain the Tenno's trust so quickly. Hun Hao's plan would then have him feign death over Uranus, and Nata would orchestrate a coup that would slaughter the Orokin leaders, then reviving Hun Hao for a surprise assault. But Nata betrayed Hun Hao. Again, with the intense familial nature of the sentients, Nata was grief-stricken by her inability to reproduce. Thus, when faced with the decision to sacrifice her newfound children, the Tenno, she relented, allowing Hun Hao to lie dormant. It is unclear as of this video how Nata became so intimately familiar with Margulis, going so far as to fashion a form nearly identical to Margulis when infiltrating the Orokin. It is possible that in her intense spying upon the Tenno, she absorbed their total sum memories regarding Margulis, forming a composite that was nearly identical to the Tenno's perception: motherly, caring, and kind, lacking the subtle darkness laid bare by Teshin in the War Within. It is also possible that before Margulis could be executed by the Seven for her crimes of apostasy, that Nata assimilated her mind, becoming more than just the outward perception of Margulis, but Margulis in her entirety. Most importantly, the question about whether or not this is the Lotus's true form remains unanswered. There are two possibilities when it comes to the creation of sentients and their chosen forms. Do they merely change their singular shape to resemble what they wish, or do they project their mind into various vessels? Much like how Hun Hao can project his consciousness into other objects, as seen with War, and the fact that sentients possess aura that can be projected, as seen in the Valkyr trailer, and lastly, given that Ballas's ability seems to induce some form of transference static, it is possible that the Lotus is merely a vessel that Nata inhabits, and her true form is much more alien like her father's. The final question is that of the sentients still on Tau. What barren, desolate worlds are left there? Are there any sentients still alive? Have they repurposed the system into some inscrutable superstructure, making a truly alien habitat that has allowed them to eke out survival over the centuries since Hun Hao and the other sentient mothers left? Do they even remember their departure? It is very likely that the remaining sentients have managed to survive just barely by altering their assimilation and terraforming nature, creating a base ecosystem that allows them to continue on, waiting for Hun Hao to bridge the other side of the gap, calling forth the rest of his ilk, or to return to Tau and bring them their salvation. But as with many things in the Warframe universe, these are mostly uncertain, and are not the only interpretations. But until the time comes when we have all the facts, this is what we know.